What's up,
That's it.
everyone? Welcome to the Unfazed Facts podcast, the podcast dedicated to all things Gym Leader Challenge in the Pokemon TCG. And today we are joined by Gym Leader Josh. What's up, my friend?
What is up, guys? Hopefully we didn't blindside you with Unfazed Facts, but it's a phenomenal name, Jeff, and I think that we're going to see this change make some good headway for GLC.
Yeah, 100%. I'm excited about all of this. For people wondering, like, why make the change now? Marshadow got banned a little while ago. Why are we making the change? Well, we're kind of changing up some things we do with the podcast. And so, step number one is name change. Step number two is Gym Leader Josh is officially our new permanent co host. You're a host now. We're taking away the co. Josh, welcome officially as the wonderful new permanent co host to Unfazed Facts. I'm so happy to have you, man.
Oh yeah, I'm so excited for this. Like when you asked me, I was like, man, do I do this? Yes, I do. So I've been super excited about doing this, and I'm excited to get into, all this new stuff. Um, I don't have too much podcast experience, but just be patient with me, and we'll eventually, just get in there, and we'll get all comfortable and talking about some good old gym leader challenge and some unfazed facts. I don't know if you noticed this, but in my most recent video, I actually leaked unfazed facts by accident because I was talking about Snorlax for some reason. And I said, and we got the Snorlax with the ability unfazed facts. And then I looked at the camera, unfazed fat.
Well, I mean, I don't think I might have missed that. I remember that you named one of our little planning documents as Unfazed Facts. So that's kind of like
Yeah.
where it came. Like, why not? We're bringing Josh on. He was kind of into it. I'm kind of into it. Let's do it. Let's have Unfazed Facts be our thing. And so here we are, starting out with Unfazed Facts. And we've got, I think, a pretty good episode today. An episode I've been kind of, I don't know, excited to talk about. I'm always excited to kind of talk Gym Leader Challenge to some degree. But like an episode that I feel like is necessary that I've been thinking about for a long time. Whenever I show up to like my locals or if I'm playing at like the one regionals I've been to, it's just this is kind of an important skill to think about. And of course, that idea is teching. And we're going to talk all about teching tonight as we get into that. So first off, Josh, let's get into just the nitty gritty of what tech cards are. If you had to define them for our listeners, what's it going to be?
So in my mind, I don't know if it's in everybody else's mind, but when it comes to tech cards, I think they are cards specifically chosen to counter a specific strategy or just another specific card that your opponent may have. And that's all depending on, and let's say, we'll just briefly just say if it's a spread deck, you're going to play something that blocks spread. If you're going to have something, your opponent is going to play something with special energy, you're going to play something that removes that special energy. So those are just some very simple examples of what tech cards are, just specific cards to block specific things that your opponent's going to be doing.
So when we're looking at putting these cards into our deck, how are we doing this, Josh?
So when we're looking to tech, there are several different ways to go about it. And it's basically just thinking about what is currently meta at the moment. We'll go over that into detail in the next couple slides. But basically, what's meta, what types are being most played, and then what archetypes in those types are being played. So I know that water has all sorts of different types. They have the snipe Wailord, like water whales, where they're playing a snipe Kyogre and Wailord. You got tank and heal water. You have just straight up low maintenance water, and there's just all sorts of different things that you have to think of whenever it comes into teching for your deck. Now, Jeff mentioned earlier that whenever we are thinking of teching for a deck, that we don't want to necessarily use more than maybe 1 to 2 tech cards. So that's why we have to be very specific in choosing those tech cards. That way we don't mess up the consistency of your own deck. So basically, what you're going to have to assess whenever you're teching is, are you going to a locals tournament? Are you going to a bigger tournament such as NAIC, LAIC, or just a regionals? And then from there, the bigger it is, the harder it's going to be to tech specific mainly because there's going to be a wider range of people that are going to be there and different types that are going to be used. So when using those examples, you're going to choose your tech cards for a wider base. So let's say you wouldn't be teching for fire, and you wouldn't definitely not be teching for fairy. You'd probably be taking for some of the bigger hitters lately, like uh, let's say Lost Zone. That one is a deck that's very easy to counter, and we'll get to those cards that way we don't spoil it here in a little bit. But whenever you're choosing going to a big tournament, wider range, a locals tournament, you have 8 to 12 people, maybe smaller, maybe a little bit bigger, but you have an idea of what everybody's favorite deck is. You have an idea of what they have won with. That way you've kind of have a smaller range of decks and a meta call to choose from. And that's going to be different ways that we're going to be able to tech.
Great explanation. I mentioned earlier in our lead up something about, having 1 to 2 tech cards, which you just alluded to there as well. You just want to make sure you don't bring down the consistency of your deck as you're preparing, because like you can over tech so easily. You can be like, oh yeah, I got to make sure I beat psychic and water and grass. Well, you can't beat everything, chat. Like we just can't do that. And so we want to make sure that our deck can still execute its game plan. It is a singleton format. Like what are we going to shove into our decks to make them do? And so that's just something we need to be careful about when we're learning tech as well. Something that sometimes I struggle with. I'm like, I got to make sure I beat this. It's just not going to happen. Focus on your 50-50 matchups. Don't focus. If you're fire, don't go all in on beating Wailord. Like, it's just not happening. I mean, like, obviously you can
Yeah.
tech for other matchups where things are going to be easier for you. Just don't focus on those really, really out of hand matchups. And so that's kind of my philosophy when I go to Tekken. Make sure I do those things.
Yeah, recently, Weeder or Eric went to go play against Andrew Mahone on stream, and you hear Andrew Mahone, he teched in, what did he tech in? Enhanced Hammer and maybe a Faba in every one of his decks to counter his single Leviathan deck. So that is an example of a small way that Andrew was like, okay, I'm going to tech against Eric here and make sure that I have 1 to 2 cards that counters this specific deck that is going to be hard to kind of get around.
I love that you brought that up, because that was like a prime example of like how to tech. Like Mahone
Yeah.
spent some time watching Weeder play that Leviathan deck, kind of figured out like what the key things that he needed to do were. Get after the Whalmer and the Wailord early, make sure you can get rid of the Lux Cape so that you can hit those specific numbers. Like, these are all things that you look at, and we're going to talk about some major players coming up, and that Wailord is definitely on our list. So this brings up, what are we teching against? We're looking at the current meta, and we're trying to figure out, what matchups do we need to beat. Again, we're trying to make our tech cards flexible, good in multiple matchups. We've only got room for only 1 or 2 cards. So, kind of, what does this look like? What are we trying to tech against? And so here's some key players. And Josh, you'll have to tell me whether you agree about it. If I was going to kind of any tournament, whether this was locals or if this was a big regional tournament, I expect to see, Wailord, Snorlax, Gallade, Guzzlord, Torterra, like all these different types, which are very popular builds, and all with cards that can kind of take control of games and win by themselves.
Yeah, I 100% would always expect to see one of these decks, no matter if it's small or big. Especially some of the more fun ones like Wailords, the Snorlax colorless. You might not see a whole lot of grass, but Dark has seemed to be gaining some popularity, especially lately, with being able to get Guzzlord firing even quicker with with all the different double colorless attachments that we have, the Turbo Energizer, the Beast Ring. Nowadays, you can get Guzzlord kind of coming up about 2, maybe 3 times a game. So Dark has been seeing a little bit more of a gain, especially Guzzlord. I pretty much, if you're going to play Dark, you're going to be playing Guzzlord regardless most of the time. Every deck is almost just a Guzzlord deck. Then you have your archetype, you know? So it's Red Banquet slash whatever else you choose almost. And then Gallade is like right now, it's funny. This list is almost exactly how I would split Wailord being like Wailord and colorless being the most you'll see, dark and grass probably being the least, with dark on the uprising, and then psychic kind of being just right there in the middle.
Grass is really popular at regionals. I know that Grass hasn't gotten too much love recently on the online scene. We actually didn't see it really do well at Baltimore regionals too. I think that Weeder had his article out, and when he covered kind of what the meta looked like there, it kind of made up a decent sized portion at the start, and then we saw all the other decks have success and Grass not so much. But I am still scared of like turn one TM evolution into turn two, Rillaboom into basic attacker doing 120, maybe 140, depending on how much energy they can get out there. Like those decks can have really explosive starts. So Grass is still a player I'm
Yes.
worried about. But like you alluded to, that like we've got these big basics, we've got strong abilities. These are all things that we kind of have to prepare for when we're looking at preparing our decks. Now, some other cards that I don't think make up like maybe like a huge amount of play, but that can still take over games by themselves, that I think that we need to be on the lookout for are these three cards that I have up on screen. So like Okidogi is, fighting is not really super consistent. But Okidogi by itself is a really powerful card. So I think that there are decks that just can't ever really beat Okidogi unless they're prepared for it. And so that's a card that I think should be on your radar if you're teching. Luxurious Cape. I know that most of us are already playing Field Blower, but Luxurious Cape is probably like one of the single most powerful cards that can win a game almost all on its own if it's left unchecked and unanswered. And then the last card here, Parallel City. There's so many setup decks in this format. If you all of a sudden have to discard two of your important Pokemon from your bench, how are you recovering? And I just think that decks need to have answers if these are going to be cards that struggle or that you struggle against.
Oh, 100%. Parallel City, especially if your opponent has set up, is just devastating. Even if it's just basics that they have out there, Parallel City can wiping out two of those is pretty devastating to your opponent. Luxurious Cape, like you said, is extremely annoying when it comes for it to be unchecked. But just as much as it plays for your opponent, sometimes it can play for you if your opponent can't get whatever the Lux Cape is attached to. You just get a 2-hit KO and you got two prizes right there in the bag. I love it when that happens. It's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, that's
then,
something that's really taken me a while to get kind of used to. Like, you don't have to Field Blower the Luxurious Cape. Sometimes attacking in twice is just good enough, or like, doing enough damage one time is good enough to take those double prizes. So, your opponent can misplay with Luxurious Cape, just like you can misplay with your answer against it. It's such an important card to just have in the back of your mind as you're playing.
yeah, and Okidogi when it came out was the answer to Snorlax at that time. Everybody was like, let's ban Snorlax, let's ban one of these double colorless energy attachments. But as soon as Okidogi came out, it was like all that chatter just went away. So Okidogi in and of itself is slightly one of those meta warpers in a way. But as soon as fighting gets some consistency, I think this Okidogi and fighting is just going to take off. I mean, fighting has everything it needs for the most part in attacking. All it needs is 1 to 2 cards to set it over the edge.
Yeah, no, I agree. And when you look at a card like Okidogi, obviously you're looking at like this really strong, fast start that fighting has. And when I started brewing with it at first, I really wanted to be like, let's just recur Okidogi. It's just such a powerful card by itself. It's only 2 energy attachments. You can just do that in one turn. Fighting just has none of the consistency that you need to do that. Like if you were to look at other decks that could do the same thing, like my Meganium Torterra deck can very easily just go, here's a Torterra, here's a Torterra. Well, if you could
Yeah.
do that with Okidogi, we would probably be calling for Okidogi to be banned. Now,
Yeah.
give Okidogi, any draw support, give it a fan rotom, which, Colorless just got fan rotom. Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's just that deck is going to go crazy. So something to look out for in the future. Should fighting get a draw card? The answer might not be no. Or maybe, yeah. Who knows? Well, all right.
Fighting needs a draw card.
It's not a good one. Not
It.
too good of one. All right. Well, hey, so we've shoved tech cards into our deck, and we'll start talking about specific tech cards and what we need to tech against here in a second. But we're a singleton format. We've got to find these one or two cards in our deck. Josh, how are we doing that?
So how are you going to find those tech cards that you put specifically in your deck to counter your opponent? Well, you're going to use Arven. You're going to use a Dragonite. You're going to use Gallade. If you have any Pokemon that have abilities that search out specific cards, you're going to use those as consistency for your deck to be able to search for those. And then if you like getting knocked out before you use your consistency cards, we got Teammates and Raihan. Teammates, whenever you get knocked out by damage, the previous turn, you're able to search your deck for 2 cards out of your deck of any witch that you want. And then Raihan, pretty much the same thing. Get knocked out by damage from the previous turn. Attach a energy from your discard to any one of your Pokemon. Search your deck for a single card to use. And then Arven helps you get an item card, I believe, and a tool card. And those, like the Arven, can find your Lux Cape and an enhanced hammer, or an escape rope, or what else can it be? That's a good tech card for that.
Uh,
Any tech card that you put in there that's an item, can search for it.
Yeah, 100%. And, it's always weird because, when you're thinking of cards like Teammates and Raihan and, even Dragonite, because it can fetch up those cards, you're thinking about like being proactive in the way that you're responding to your opponent's KO, right? Like you're looking to immediately KO. And sometimes you just can't, right? Like, hey, all of a sudden, like we're even on prizes and my game plan was to Teammates for counter energy. Well, I can't really do that anymore. But maybe instead of, going the KO route, maybe I can use these cards to better set up while putting my opponent back a step. And so that's when kind of these cards really come into play for teching. Because, like, honestly, if you were thinking about it, I don't really want a Raihan for a tech card. I want a Raihan and get a KO, but you can't. And so they are nice to be able to do that. Some decks don't even have to use these cards, right? I'm thinking like some of the best techers in our format right now are those turbo colorless decks because they're not really necessarily like using these cards to go get tech cards. They're just seeing 6 to 7 new cards a turn with Skwovet, Oranguru, and Babero, right? They have those 3 set up. They're just digging through their deck to find the card that they need, and they can play additional cards while they're siphoning and filtering through to get that KO. So I really think that Turbo Lax is one of the better decks at teching for opponents.
Yeah.
And then the other 2 I would say are, we have Dragonite Fast Call and you have Gallade with the Buddy Catch, which lets you get a supporter. I think those are the other 2 big techers for the format. I mean, Psychic's got them all.
Yeah, Psychic has pretty much everything, and it's getting stuff every set almost that you can just have fun with, like Insurging Sparks. There's just all sorts of fun different cards that Psychic gets to play with.
Yep, I'm excited about it. But let's get into these tech cards. So the first thing that we're looking to tech for is our opponents have some pretty busted abilities. We need to stop them. So there are a couple ability stoppers on the screen. Josh, talk us through them.
So whenever it comes to your opponent's pesky abilities that you wish they didn't have at the moment, you have some options to play. We got one of the most popular options that most 99% of decks will play is going to be Hex Maniac. Hex Maniac basically turns off your own and your opponent's abilities till the end of your opponent's turn. So you can play that, pass, your opponent has no abilities, and then you have your abilities coming back on your next turn. Just make sure whenever you're playing this card that you want to make sure that you're using all of your abilities as well. There's plenty of times where people have played a Hex Maniac and turned off their own abilities before they have used them. So that is Hex Maniac. And then you have Silent Lab. Silent Lab is most of the time going to be in your spread decks to turn off things such as the Mew bench barrier, the Mr. Mime bench barrier, but it has other things that it can turn off as well. It can turn off this Wobbuffet that we have on this slide right now, where it is a basic, it has an ability, but now it has no ability according to Silent Lab. It just turns off all of your opponent's basic abilities. And then we have Canceling Cologne. This one isn't so much used in a lot of different decks. This is just an option. So you see this card in standard a lot where um, your opponent or you can boss up, let's say a mana fee or something like that, to where you turn off that barrier, and then that allows you to take out some of your opponent's bench. So canceling cologne is basically Hex Maniac or Silent Lab as long as your that Pokemon's ability is in the active spot. And then Wobbuffet, again, like we said earlier, Psychic has so much to play around with. Wobbuffet just turns off all abilities except for Psychic Pokemon's abilities. You got to remember that too, because a lot of people forget that that is a thing as well. But Wobbuffet, if your opponent is playing Wobbuffet and in the active and you are not playing Psychic, you're not going to have a good time because you're just not going to be able to have access to your abilities. So these are different ways that you can turn off your opponent's abilities. Is the most popular option being Hex Maniac, all the way to your Pokemon, which is also a way to turn off your opponent's abilities.
Yeah, and this gets tough. It gets tricky depending on the type that you're playing because fire doesn't really have a good way to play Hex Maniac. Your Charizard needs to double up your energies. And the same thing could be said for grass with Venusaur that has that same ability to double up grass energies in play. At the same time, those decks are very heavily reliant on their own abilities. So having like a Wobbuffet in the active could really set those decks back, a turn or two if they can't find escape rope or a way to get out of the active. So I've, especially in grass decks before, especially when I know that Psychic is one of the most popular types, have considered playing Silent Lab just so I can like use Grottle to like start setting up my board instead of just giving Psychic kind of these free turns. I've seen someone solo a grass deck just on Wobbuffet chip-ins. It's kind of hilarious how that can happen. And then, Canceling Clone is a cute card. I see it in Free Water a lot, which is kind of funny because Free Water gets wrecked by ability lock. So you definitely need
Yeah.
Canceling Cologne against like a Wobbuffet or something like that. And Silent Lab is just like, the card that I probably play the most is one of my tech cards because I play a lot of spread and you just need Silent Lab if you're a spread deck like you mentioned. It's funny because I was playing it in my colorless spread deck too, and of course I'm running like an all basic draw engine line with Squovit and Oranguru, so like you have to play Silent Lab to progress your game plan, but it also stops you to a certain degree too, so it's just one of those
Yes.
cards you got to be careful when you play it, but definitely all good tech pieces because no one wants to be ability locked, and when you are ability locked, it's kind of like sometimes your opponent just passes back to you and you've gotten a free turn. Sometimes, if you've ever played Magic, this is kind of just like time walking your opponent.
Yeah, yeah. I remember that one time I was playing metal and you were playing dark with Galarian Wheezing, and turn off those abilities, they're gone.
Turns out that Metal is heavily reliant on all of its abilities, and Galarian Weezing basically just solos that deck. It's amazing how like that card can hold up an archetype, right? Like it can hold up, Poison Dark. Like that deck exists
Yeah.
basically on the back of Galarian Weezing. So like these are things that you're gonna have to tech for, especially if you're Metal. I don't know how Metal really deals with Galarian Weezing, especially if you're playing Caparaja in your list, and I've been playing Caparaja in my list recently. Like you don't really have room for Hex because if you Hex, all of a sudden now your opponents can play abilities, or you lose your Zamazinta's 30 damage reduction ability. So like playing Hex in those decks is kind of a little wonky with what you're trying to do. So making sure you have the rec tech pieces are really important, especially if it's
Yeah.
something that stops your deck.
Yeah, Hex, you got to be very responsible. You got to play your Hex Maniac very responsibly whenever you're playing it.
For me, always first turn Hex. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do
First
that.
turn
Don't do
Hex.
it. Against Water, man, Hex is hilarious, right? Because you're playing this mind game. Like if they have a Sobble bench, you're like Hex, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden
You're
just
like,
like stops them from doing anything.
play Drizzle, I dare you.
Right? I've had to play Drizzile and Inteleon through through some hexes before, just because
Oh,
like
yes.
Inteleon's a pretty good attacker. So, well, all right. Since Pokemon's inception as a trading card game, it's been dominated by big basics. So, how do you mitigate what big basics can do. And these are two cards I included, but like almost every type has a similar effect or an ability that's kind of what's looked at on screen here. So one of them is this Nidoqueen with the Queen Press attack for a dark and a colorless. It does 90, but it does have this interesting effect that you get to prevent all damage done to it by basics. So again, thinking back to Turbo Lax here, if that's a deck that's just running your format, you can use this Nidoqueen. The only evolution Pokemon that Turbo Lax decks play is Babarrel. So if they're
Yeah.
charging up their Babarrel to take down your Nidoqueen, you feel pretty good about that. Ice
Oh, yeah.
Cube has the same thing. It's a basic, so it's a little bit easier to get out there. 1 water, 2 colorless does 70, and then has that same effective attack. In Fire, there's a Pyroar that has an ability, so it's not even an attack that does the same thing. So again, there's just these different things that you can do if you're struggling against big basics. I'm not sure if they're worth it. Josh, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, if your arch nemesis at your locals is playing big basic GLC decks, you better put Ice Cube in your water deck, and you better put Nidoqueen in your dark deck. I think that if you are having, like Jeff said, trouble with against big basic decks, that these guys are just going to make it very easy for you to be able to get through to that. Now I know that I'm not too familiar with using Ice Cube too much, but I do know that Nidoqueen and Nidoking have a special deck that was made. I think it came out in the 151 set. Do you know much about that deck, Jeff?
Oh yeah, it's definitely a deck that I've played. I've got a video on my YouTube channel of me playing it. My list is called Better Than Z-Man's List, if you're trying to look at it for Cardboard Warriors. But a crew came together and they were trying to make Nidoqueen and Nidoking work. And I think we've talked about it, a couple different times on the podcast. It's just a really neat deck and people like it, and I enjoy playing it too. But it really came we started playing the deck and you're like, wow, Nidoking does 190 damage for free. And then the more that you play the deck, you're just like, wow, Nidoqueen is the better card. Like 2 energy, 90
Yeah.
damage, can't be damaged by basics. Like, hey, all of a sudden Raikou isn't KOing it. All of a sudden, well, not that it can anymore. All of a sudden,
Yeah.
Regieleki isn't damaging your Nidoqueen. All of a sudden, Snorlax and Turbo Lax can't do anything. And we were like, yeah, we did it. And then Okidogi got printed, and I don't think you can play the Nidos anymore competitively. But it definitely stopped and was a huge player in the meta for a bit. And so I respect it a lot. It's kind of where the idea of this slide came from. Tech for your big basics. If you're going to beat them, there's a lot of them. This is how you do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's some good big basics coming out in Surging Sparks for Dragon coming up. So yeah, definitely. If you have trouble against big basics, these guys are going to help you make that path a little smoother for you.
Yeah. Things probably got a little bit easier for a dragon to get around something like a Nidoqueen just because Raging Bolt exists now. And I mean, that card's so good. I mean, let's just take a moment. Raging Bolt appreciation, everyone. If you haven't played Raging Bolt yet, you are missing out. I remember sitting on here a couple weeks ago talking with Luke about that card. I don't even think he wanted to include it on the slideshow, and I was like, nah, bro.
Oh.
And then here it is, just won Full Grip Games locals. I won my locals. People are having success with Raging Bolt all over the place. So respect on that dinosaur cat.
Yeah, and the art on that card is awesome.
Yeah,
Makes it worth playing.
You got to get that Best Buy promo too. It's like $10, but I mean, just to have the little stellar crown thing in the corner, max bling on my Raging Bolt. Raikou left, but long neck Raikou is back.
Oh, I love me some long neck Raikou.
Oh yeah. You know what? Is it too late to change my Twitch name from All About That Beige to Long Neck Raikou? I don't know. It's something to think about. Well, we're changing names this week. Might as well think about doing it.
Long neck beige. There you go.
Whoa, so many implications.
All right. But next we got Text for Special Energy.
Yep, Text for Special Energy. Lots of cool cards for this. Special Energy is really good. We're talking like, double energies. We're talking effect plus charging up an attacker. So having an answer for them is really good. Almost every type, except fire, has a good special energy. And so like having these tools is flexible. We talked about it at the beginning. Make sure your tech pieces are flexible. So, Josh, how are you responding to your opponent's special energies?
So if your opponent is playing a deck that relies heavily on special energy, let's bring up colorless right now because that is the heaviest in more ways than one deck that plays special energy. I would suggest playing or taking a few cards for that, especially this Guacamo here, that you can discard a special energy from each of your opponent's Pokemon. So if they're playing and they're just got energy on everything, building something up on the bench or anything like that, you can play Guacamo and boom, there you go. You just got rid of 2 to 3 turns on their bench. Enhanced Hammer is pretty free. You just use it, discard anything. It's only one though. However, it is one of the most effective ones because you can play it as a non-supporter. It's an item. It's pretty fun to play, and it just has so much. It can work for almost any deck, especially let's say Leviathan. I know that that deck is brought up a lot. It relies on that special energy for that Wailord to hit for that 220 damage. You enhanced hammer, and boom, that special energy's gone. Temple of Sinnoh just turns all your opponent's special energy as well as your own into just a colorless energy. So let's say if you are playing against your opponent, they're playing a typed special energy. Let's say if they're playing let's say if they're playing a counter energy, they're behind on prizes, or they're using that counter energy or anything like that, it'll turn that into a colorless. So even if their attack they have that counter energy, they're behind on prizes, and they have, like, let's say a psychic and a colorless on there, it turns it into they wouldn't even be able to pay for that psychic energy with that because it's just one colorless energy. And then we got Faba. Faba is pretty cool. It says choose a Pokemon tool card or special energy card and attach to one of your opponent's Pokemon or any stadium and put it into the lost zone so they can't get it back into their deck. Faba is a good way to make sure that your opponent cannot get those back into their deck in any way. They are lost in the lost zone forever. And you got Bastodon here. It just has the ability Earth and Shield. It prevents all damage done to your metal Pokemon that has from your opponent's Pokemon that has any special energy attached. So if you're playing against anything that is heavily reliant on special energy and you know that everybody's playing special energy, you can just play this Bastodon into your deck and you wouldn't even have to worry about getting damaged until they play a Hex Maniac. And then you might have to worry. But until then, you are good.
Yeah.
But yeah, these are some different ways to take against special energy.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of respect here on these cards. Obviously, Tricky Jim has mentioned time and time again how good Enhanced Hammer is. And, my response to that is also like, how do you find it? And we mentioned earlier, Arvin, Raihan, maybe you're playing greens. Like Enhanced Hammer, just getting rid of a double colorless energy. Guzzlord plays it. You've got all those special energies in the, special energy water builds that are popping up. So just having access to Enhanced Hammer can just be, stop your opponent from doing something in a turn. Temple of Sinnoh stadiums getting bumped. It's less of a tech card, but I do like it a lot in certain builds. You can't really play it with the new Caparaja because you're usually powering up your own Caparaja with a special energy, so that one's a little bit tough. Faba is a card that I think might be a bit overplayed, especially in decks like Dragon and Psychic that have the Buddy Catch ability to search it up. It's pretty flexible in what it can do. It's just like, do you want that effect on a supporter? So I really do like Faba. I'm going to encourage people to start playing it more and more. And then I'm going to start switching to playing all basics just to get around that.
There you go.
Now,
Meta manipulation.
there we go. Someone's got to do it, right? Why not me? And then we got Bastiodon. Man, this card came out, and I was like, that's pretty cute. I thought it was cute. And then Roger played it. For those of you who don't know, Roger's Acco Blubber. We've been talking about him a lot. He's been kind of ripping through these Twin Leaf Test tournaments, winning with metal here and there. And he has just been playing this Bastiodon. Or he used to play it when you had the Pokemon Research Lab. It's so much easier to get fossils out then. Since then, it's probably not worth it. But again, Snorlax, it was just such a big player. All of a sudden, it just didn't matter. You just got this Bastiodon in play, and you just win. And so that was really neat to see. And then Giancomo, or however you pronounce this card, it hasn't had the same effect that I thought it might. I saw this card and I was like, is this card the answer? No one's playing it, Josh. No one's playing it. Discard a special energy from each of your opponent's Pokemon. I wonder if it's just because Archeops has kind of fallen out of favor a bit, and so people aren't shooting out energies like they used to onto their Pokemon. If you find that card, are you in a position to where it even matters, right? If your opponent has multiple Pokemon set up and you play Giacomo, does it even matter? Because they can just maybe reattach the following turn and then you haven't played a supporter to progress your game plan because you're probably already behind if they're already set up and have multiple attackers on board. So I just don't
Yeah.
know if Giacomo is the answer, but at some point it's got to be, right? We all got to start maybe looking at that card and being like, there's a place for it somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think Enhanced Hammer is hands down. I think we can both agree that Enhanced Hammer is hands down the best way of getting rid of your opponent's special energy. And Guacamole and Temple of Sinnoh being, those kind of low ends, like you're gonna play it maybe if there's something just oppressing the meta so much that you just have you have no choice but to play those. And then Faba is, I think, your next best bet. Besides also that Flannery that can discard a stadium and a special energy.
Yeah.
I think Flannery. You play Flannery or Faba, and Temple of Sinnoh, Guacamole, probably not too much, and then definitely Enhanced Hammer.
Yeah, I love that you brought up Flannery because we were talking about it in our post talk or pre talk warm up here. Because Flannery is super sweet. It's a card I really hadn't been on my radar very much, but the fact that it is a supporter that's kind of like a less flexible field blower was kind of cool. And tools and tool recursion is becoming more popular. I'm gonna blame Weeder for it. Sorry, Eric, it is your fault that people are starting to just cape and then get it back over and over and over again. And so I think, lost zoning it with Faba is kind of cool. Or having maybe a second answer is also pretty cool. A card that we don't have on screen, there's something that's similar to Enhanced Hammer, but it's on a coin flip. What's it called? Something drill or something?
Dangerous Drill.
Dangerous Drill. So Dangerous Drill is like pretty cool. I played base set to Fossil is like my retro format of choice, and that just has like energy removal and super energy removal, and those cards are toxic. But the fact that it drills on a coin flip makes it a little bit better, almost unplayable, in fact. So that's another card to consider if you're a gambling man or gambling woman or gambling person. But I'm not that, so just give me good old Enhanced Hammer.
Oh yeah, I think Dangerous Drill. The Dangerous Drill, you can only play this card if you discard a dark Pokemon from your hand. So this would be only for dark, but you get to discard a Pokemon tool or special energy card from your opponent's Pokemon.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like there's an item card that's on a coin flip that discards an energy, but can't think of the name, so we'll move on. People watching on YouTube, comment on
they'll
tell me what it
know,
is.
that's for sure.
That's good. So I love my YouTubers. They let me know when I'm wrong. I appreciate y'all. Know that. Like and subscribe. All right.
Like and subscribe.
Text for attacking the bench. Going after the bench is pretty important. And I think oftentimes you see decks that can manipulate and can disrupt what their opponent has going on outside of what's going on the active, have a lot of success. And so here are kind of the three techs that I see for attacking the bench, Josh, and then you can tell me if you agree with me about its importance in the current format too. So Parallel City is just probably one of the most powerful cards. It's one of those like two-sided cards, so you get to choose which effect. Almost always you're going to be pointing this effect towards your opponent, which is going to limit their bench to just 3 spots. Unfortunately, your grass, fire, or water Pokemon do 20 less damage, but that never matters. Let's be honest. I've never really seen that come into effect. But limiting your opponent's bench is just great. And then you kind of have that on a supporter here. It's not as permanent. And of course, here we're talking about a stadium being permanent when it can just be easily bumped. But this is not as permanent as Parallel City, but it is Avery. So you get to draw 3 cards, and then your opponent discards down to 3. And then, of course, you just have Snipe. And I chose Kyogre because is there a better sniper in the game than Kyogre? I mean, just 180 damage to the bench is just one of the most busted things you can do. And I just think that if you go after your opponent's bench, you're going to put yourself in a winning position. I'm thinking about a game that I played a couple weeks ago where, I had Raging Bolt in the active and my opponent was playing Dark. And of course they had Guzzlord in the active, but they had their Liepard on the bench. I'm just going to hit that Liepard and set them back a couple turns. and I can deal with the Guzzlord as it comes up.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think Kyogre is talking about literally attacking the bench. By the way, with the Kyogre, but I think in Surging Sparks, Armarouge has a very similar attack. I think it's an evolving Pokemon, but for two fire, one colorless, it hits 180. But I think you have to discard everything, all the cards that you just put on there. But it's pretty cool. Just another fire has another tool, that might help it get better. But Parallel City, I'd agree with you, is one of the biggest semi-permanent cards that you can do to set back your opponent. I like to use Parallel City, if you have it early, play it early. But a lot of the times, if you're patient or you get it about mid game, your opponent has played out their full bench, and Parallel City, you can take all that away from them, or at least most of it away from them. Same thing with Avery, except you get to draw 3 cards. And if you get a VS Seeker, maybe, and you don't have any other cards that you want to play, and your opponent has, reset up again, you can just play that again. And sometimes, whenever you get lucky enough to be able to recur 2 turns like that in a row, it can be pretty bad for your opponent as well. And then, snobbing anything on the bench. I hate getting snobbed on the bench with something that I so preciously hold dear. And I'm like, just make it one more turn. It's like Chris Farley on Black Sheep when he's like, hold strong, little roots. And you're just telling that to your bench. You're like, oh, come on, come on. But yeah, these are some nice techs for attacking the bench of your opponent.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I think that that's when you see kind of the strongest decks in the format. They all kind of have ways to go after the bench, whether that, we didn't really bring up, Boss or Guzma because every deck plays those. They're not really tech cards. They're just good cards to play in general. But that's, bossing up one of your opponent's key support mons and getting rid of it. It's just one of the best things you can do. So I feel like having other ways to do it is really important. Parallel is just, it's not a bannable card, but it is one of those format warping cards. If we look at Grass and where Grass has kind of been in the format, it's kind of up and down with Parallel, and Parallel is kind of its biggest weakness and biggest enemy. Torterra can't do big numbers if it doesn't have evolution Pokemon on the bench.
Yep, it needs more.
Well, speaking about Torterra, techs for high HP Mons. And this is one that was kind of, I don't want to say hard to think about, but there's obvious answers and then there's less obvious answers for this, right? And so when I
Yes.
thought of this, these are some cards that I thought of, Josh. First off, you got Professor Kukui here. Technical Machine Devolution. You got this Gourgeist, which I think is kind of funny, which I think we'll talk about a little bit more as we get into what Psychic Spread will look like. And then we got Mimikyu with a Copycat. What do you feel about these cards and then teching for higher HP Mons in general?
I just want to say shout out to Jeffrey with the Professor Kukui. That's his favorite guy, and he loves this card so much. But Professor Kukui lets you draw 2, hit for another 20 damage. But speaking on damage modifiers are good techs for high HP Mons. We might not have the tools out there, but we got Muscle Band, Vitality Band, Fighting Fury Belt. That helps you hit numbers to be able to tech against your opponent's higher HP Mons, especially if you're hitting, for 10, 20 less damage. You can just get out those guys, play them, and then you're home free, being able to knock out your opponent. Now, let's say if you're a spread deck, a lot of spread decks will play Technical Machine Devolution. A lot of the time, you find yourself spreading, spreading, spreading. And if you're lucky enough to where your opponent isn't healing all of that spread damage, in about 2 to 3 to 4 turns, you can play Devolution and just create the most devastating turn for your opponent and take 3 to 5 prizes. I mean, the prizes aren't limitless, but you can definitely take quite a bit of prizes using that devolution. And that's the same for any spread deck. Gourgeist put damage counters on both active Pokemon until the remaining HP is 10. This is one of those, less obvious ways to go about taking out your HP Mons. But if you play that Hypnotic Laser card in this specific deck, I believe Hypnotic poisons, so you can just poison them, use this Gourgeist, and then your opponent is gonna get knocked out by that next turn. So that's kind of like a funny, memey way of dealing with your opponent's high HP Mon. And then you got your copycat attackers such as Sudowoodo. I believe there is it the fake out Weavile that has that attack? There's a double colorless Weavile, I think that, or is it Zoroark? It's a Zoroark with the fake out, isn't there?
Ooh, you're messing with me too much. I'm trying to think about if that's the one. But are you talking about the copycat attack? Because there is
Yeah,
a
yeah.
Zoroark with the copycat attack. I can't remember what it's called though, but it definitely has it.
It might be fake out. It might not be. You can put
Mhm.
that responsibility on me, but that's another option as a copycat attacker, being able to just copy your opponent's move. And if you have, let's say, the most obvious and most common brought up one is the Wailord that has the special energy. You can copy that as long as you have a special energy attached with your Pokemon that you're going to attack Wailord with. You're going to be able to hit for 240 damage, taking out possibly that Wailord as long as there's not any defenses or damage soak uppers. Forget damage soak uppers.
I'll allow it.
Tanky tools. But yeah, those are some different techs for the higher HP mons. Is your damage modifiers, your devolutioners, your funny Pokemon that can take your opponent's damage HP all the way down, and then your copycat attackers. And I think there's those three right now, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not a lot of copycat attackers, so it's kind of hard to mention that as like being a like tried and true tech for a lot of things. Obviously, Psychic has a ton of them. Again, that's what we're going to keep saying as we go through this. You'll hear us keep mentioning Colorless, Psychic, Water is pretty good at too when it has the Inteleon line. It can search up trainers. But copycat attackers are really kind of one of the most important things to see in this format right now because you have a lot of really strong, powerful attackers with high HP mons that get KO'd if you can use their attacks against them. The Gorgeist, I'll talk about a bit. I think the Gorgeist is really funny. Obviously, that split scream attack leaves your opponent's Pokemon with 10 damage left. There's like an Alolan Raticate too that does the same thing that a
Yeah.
lot of people were talking that has like triple colorless attack cost that people were using as like in a Crobat deck to take 3 prizes, which is also
Yeah.
pretty cool. So if you imagine using the Alolan Raticate against a Wailord that has I guess Wailord's probably not a good example because it takes 30 less damage, but against a Snorlax with a cape on it, right? And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden it's got 10 HP left, and you go up into that 3 prize Kovac, and it's got a cape on it. You just get to take 4 prizes off of that Snorlax, and you've traded
Oh
2,
yeah.
right? So it's kind of like cutesy. Again, cutesy is the way to go for it, but if that's what you're expecting to see at your locals, you might think about that. I think the Gourgeist is pretty good on its own, especially if you're playing a spread list, right? It's likely that your opponent is going to get KO'd the next turn as you spread damage to the entire board. Plus, we're going to talk about the Pumpkaboo in a second. I think, with a couple new cards coming, like that Comb for Gigas that's coming out, this Gorgas got a lot better because not only does it spread damage, have a basic that has a good ability when you play it, but it also doesn't have an ability in its stage 1, so it's not getting hit like with Comb for Gigas, like what's the other card? This Miss Magus, the Miss Magus with the ability.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that this Gourgeist is going to see a lot more play going forward in those decks, which is why I wanted to include it and the Pumpkaboo coming up. Now, Devolution TM, really cool card. I've had the debate. I don't think it's worth it a lot of the times. I'm coming around to it a bit. It does make a lot of matchups a lot easier, especially if you have a ancient trait barrage attacker, which can attack twice. If you can get something down from a stage 2 all the way down to its basic in a single turn, instead of having to hit 90 or 170 in terms of HP damage, if you just have to hit 60 and 70, your life as a spread deck gets immediately easier.
Yes. 100%.
All right. Techs for one trick pony decks. And Josh, when I think of one trick pony decks, there are 2 that come to mind. Hitmonbros that rely on 3 pieces in sequence to do what they need to do. And of course, Sableye Lost Zone decks, which only have 1 attacker. So how can you, if you're struggling against these decks, how can you beat them? And of course, what's the counterplay to the way to beat them?
Oh yes, it's funny. It's funny for the one trick pony decks. They also have to tech like they had to tech against and for themselves at the same time. So we have Lost City. Obviously, this is going to be how you're going to get rid of those one trick pony decks. So what you're trying to do when playing Lost City is, if you're playing against Lost Zone, you're going to wait for them to put that Sableye out, and then you're going to play your Lost City. You're going to boss up that Sableye if it's not already in the active, and you're just going to Lost Zone their Sableye. Of course, they got another card in the Lost Zone, so they're going to be pretty happy about that, but they're going to be very upset that they can't do anything else beyond that. So that is definitely just the way to get rid of them. And then your Hitmon Bros deck, um, they you got to hit with your Hitmonchan, your Hitmonlee, then your Hitmontop, and if you take out one of those pieces, they're not going to be able to go throughout that combo and do any of their strategy. And I would say that you probably want to, if able, if you had to pick how you wanted to take those out, you would probably take out the Hitmonlee. That way you don't get that snipe attack on that next turn, but then you also deny their Hitmontop 60 to everything at the same time. And then I wouldn't worry about Hitmonchan too much because it's just a 40 hit and run. But Lost City is pretty devastating. This actually happened to me. I'm pretty sure I was playing up against Jeffrey in the summer, I almost called it summer fall championship, but in the summer championship, and he Lost City'd my Whelmer. He knocked out my fully energized Whelmer, and then I brought it back and fully energized him again, and then he Lost City'd my Whelmer on the next turn. And then I remember, I think Jeff came in later on in that specific game, but I had been clawing my way from a 6-2 prize down to, I think it was like a 2-2 or really, really close. But Jeffrey ended up taking out the win. But that Lost City can be extremely devastating. And if I were to advocate for a ban for a card that makes things not fun, it would definitely be Lost City. Lost City isn't fun for anybody, including sometimes the person that plays it, because it can backfire. But then you have Rescue Scarf. Rescue Scarf is a fun tool. It's very close to the splash energy that water plays. But basically, you play Rescue Scarf, and if it stays on, if you get damaged, or I believe, yeah, if you get damaged by damage and not damage counters, you're able to have that Pokemon come back to your hand. That way, you can play it out again. So you'd put this on your Sableye, and hopefully it stays on there. You get knocked out by damage, and it comes back to your hand. And even if there's a Lost City in play, it still comes back to your hand. So that's a really cool way of kind of teching against Lost City at the same time. So these are very specific niche cards, especially Rescue Scarf. I don't see anything playing this besides, I think Free Water plays that as well, to keep that Cramorant in play as well, because you don't want to lose that Cramorant.
Yep. No, you're right. They are definitely like these super niche tech cards. And really, the only deck I've really ever seen play Rescue Scarf is Lost Zone Psychic, because they do have a couple of room to tech in there because they're so item based in the way that they
Yeah.
go about what they're trying to do. So they can have like a little bit more of these flexible cards because their draw power comes from Pokemon abilities on board and then some item cards to help them find like the one or two supporters that they need to play. But I'm with you, like Lost City in a singleton format feels really rough in general, but it is one of the most powerful ways to keep some kind of more busted strategies in check. Like, imagine if Lost Zone Psychic was super more consistent than it already is. You're probably going to put Lost City in your deck just so that you have a chance against that, because that deck preys on evolution setup decks like no one's business. And so having an answer is great. Now, the hard part is, it's great to have a tech card like Lost City in your deck. You got to find it, and you have to have a way to take a KO. And is your deck capable of doing that if you're teching in Lost City? That's something you definitely have to think about. I think the best place for Lost City decks is Dragon, which off of one Goose Mahala, which can be got off Dragonite, can basically set up an attack with double Dragon energy. Colorless is another good place for that. Colorless might be a little rough. If like Snorlax gets KO'd on the return with Lost City in play, because those decks do rely a lot on Snorlax, so having your own card work against you there might be tough. But Lost City, good card. I hate it. Hate it, hate it, hate it.
Yeah, we can agree on that one. Definitely.
All right. Well, hey, you hate Lost City? Well, techs for some stadiums. And obviously, we're all playing Field Blower. Let's go ahead and put that. If you're not playing Field Blower in your deck right now, I think you're throwing. There was a time when I thought, hey, Field Blower is a flex spot. No, it's not. We all need to be playing Field Blower. And here's some techs that I think are really important, or at least going to be important going forward. Chaotic Swell is a card that I think is, probably adequately played, but it feels underplayed at times.
Yeah.
Having this effect that you get to play a stadium, that whenever another stadium gets played, you get to discard Chaotic Swell and that stadium. It's kind of just like a free pitfall for your opponent. Like, are you going to risk it playing your own stadium? And then sometimes it's just bait for a Field Blower. Like, before you play your stadium, you got to get rid of this one. And so if they Field Blower this, they're not Field Blowing your Luxurious Cape if you kept it in hand.
Hmm.
I mentioned the Goregeist. I do think that card's going to start seeing more play in Psychic spread decks. I think this Pumpkaboo is perfect. It's just like a Field Blower on a pre-evolution that you get to play down. I think this card is pretty good. I think we'll see it's all play in Standard when it was in there. I don't know if it's still in rotation. I have no idea about Standard. But I do think this Pumpkaboo is pretty good, especially with some new tools that are getting added to the format. And then Lost Vacuum, just get rid of it forever. That's what this card's about. Lost Vacuums,
Yep.
bye-bye. And so I think that more people should be playing something in conjunction with Field Blower to deal with these cards, because it's pretty important to, like, you could Field Blower your opponents like Flipstone early and get rid of a pivot, but then they come back with a tool that's better, and all of a sudden you're like, uh-oh,
Yeah.
So I do think having two is a pretty good idea in this day and age. Josh, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, a lot of the times you play your field blower and you're like, man, I did some damage. And then they put another tool out there or a stadium or what have you. And you're like, man, I wish I would have waited just a little bit longer. But they were probably waiting on you to play your field blower. And, that happens a lot. But Chaotic Swell, I love Chaotic Swell as it is a awesome way to, tech against a lost city or just a parallel city or any stadium. You just play that sucker out, and they are either face to play their lost vacuum, field blower, or maybe like get their Pumpkaboo out there if they're playing that Pumpkaboo in their psychic deck. The Chaotic Swell is an awesome way to stay to tech against your opponent's stadiums. In that same game I was playing against Jeffrey where he lost on my Whalmer, he actually used his field blower to bump my Chaotic Swell so he could put his Lost City out there. And we were talking about teching and stuff like that. He was like, that's why I put my Lost City was for Pokemon such as your Wailord. And I was like, that's why I put my Chaotic Swell in the deck for stadiums such as your Lost City. So it's kind of funny that like everybody is going to be teching for something. And usually it's just going to be those 1 to 2 cards. But your opponent's going to have it a lot of the time.
Oh, yeah.
That's what
Especially
it always feels like.
your good opponents, and when your good opponent is playing a good deck, Jeffrey playing colorless that gets to churn through their deck and find some pieces, like they're gonna be just sitting on some cards in your hand, and you're gonna make a play being like, I hope they don't have Guzma, and they're just gonna have it in their hand, and you're gonna be like, yeah, knew it. And that
Yeah.
Lost City Field Blower play was definitely something that you'd expect from a high caliber player like Jeffrey. Yeah.
Uh-huh. But yeah, these are just different ways to tech against those stadiums. One card that is like a natural tech, and it's kind of a silly just to bring it up. But it's the Tingaloo for the new fighting. It's 30 to everything. You discard a stadium. It plays that many stadiums because it wants to attack, but it also uses itself as its own little tech, in a funny way.
hmm Yeah, it's hilarious how that card works, because like your tech against bench barrier is Silent Lab, but you're
Yeah.
having to discard your own Silent Lab in order to use Tinglu, and Tinglu isn't KOing a bench barrier on its own with a 30 damage. It has to do it twice, so you'd have to recover the Silent Lab to do it
Yeah,
again.
it's so funny.
But it's also kind of hilarious how that card works, because every deck is playing some sort of setup stadium, right? Like Artisan is kind of this free for all for all types now. Then you got your Brooklet Hills and your Stormy Mountains. So, Ting Lu coming out there is going to be active pretty early because your opponent is going to put that card out there to get set up. Do you stall your own game plan to, stop what your opponent's doing? Sometimes you can't afford to do that, right? If you're a Rain Dance Water deck, you need to get Blastoise, Excalibur, Frostmoth going ASAP because you don't have time for 3 to 4 attachments. You're trying to do that on turn 2 off an Ear off a Drizzile. And so, those decks can't really afford to do that. They're going to play down their Brooklet Swell, and then here comes Ting Lu, whoosh, 32 everywhere, plus
Oh,
Bye Bye
yeah, yeah,
Stadium.
yeah. I love that card. It's silly.
Yeah. I don't know if you were around, Josh, because it's hard. You kind of came up on my radar probably a couple months ago, and so when Paradox Rift got spoiled, we were all like, "Gym Leader Challenge is ruined. All the TM Evolution exists. You can do it twice with this Torchic. We're done. It's doomed. The format is unfun. Go ahead and ban it. Pre-ban it." And it didn't end up being that way. Turbo Energize turned out to be the best one of all of those, and even then, it's not super oppressive. So, we were talking a lot more about teching for tools back in the day and stopping what your opponent is doing. I do think teching for tools is still important, but Field Blower plus something else might be enough, or maybe just Field Blower is enough if you play it right. But we do have some techs for tools, and we do have some cool techs for tools that might only get used once. Things like the TMs, Crisis Punch, Blindside, Evolution, Devolution, those sorts of things. And here they are on the screen. We've got Tool Jammer, that when it's attached to a Pokemon that's in the active spot, tools that's attached to your opponent's active Pokemon have no effect. And this is effectively stopping things like those TMs that we mentioned. There's this cute little Goomy, and I don't know if you're a Goomy fan, Josh. I'm a huge Goomy fan.
I like Goomy.
I like Goomy all the way up to its stage 2 as well. But it has this really cool sticky rebrand ability. And so if it's in the active, your opponent's attacks cost 1 colorless more, which basically stops any turn 1 shenanigans of the like. And then you also get to play another basic in your dragon deck before we got all these new dragon printings. So Goomy used to see a lot of play back in the day. And I say a lot of play. It saw some play back in the day.
Some play.
And then we got a stadium like Lysander Labs, and there's another stadium that effectively has the exact same ability. I can't remember what it's called, but it's an effective reprint of what this card is. Jamming Tower. But tools have no effect both in play. And so these are just things to kind of tech if you're worried about tools, things to worry about. But I think this might be overkill, Josh. Don't you agree?
Yeah, it might be a little overkill, but definitely if there are some tools and people are, doomsdaying over those tools, these are definitely cards to play against that. And it's funny because I guess I found Cardboard Warriors and your podcast maybe about 2 or 3 episodes in. I didn't know there was a huge community for it, and I've just been, doing my own thing and going to regionals and playing GLC events there every now and then, and was like, okay, how do I keep up with anything? But then I found the Cardboard Warriors, and I knew of the Tricky Gym Discord where they had the GLC. But what's funny is that I didn't know that there was such doomsday over Paradox Rift. That is funny to hear, actually.
It was a very contentious time. There was talk of pre-banning. We were still reeling from Snorlax, and I think that the banning of the lab kind of led into the Paradox Rift kind of doomsday thoughts. Oh man, we can get Archeops out on turn 2 a different way if these cards exist at the same time. You can just get your fossil up to a stage 2. Things are going to be bad for us. We're doomed. You can Devo with the fighting Archeops in play. Oh no, these TMs are going to ruin the game. And it turns out, I'm going to be honest, there are some non-games because of TMs, because your opponent just has busted fast starts. But there are non-games because of donking. There's non-games because you didn't draw a second basic on your third turn of the game. So I think the TMs have changed Gym Leader Challenge dramatically, no. But a lot of those cards from Paradox Rift have really made the format really fun. I think we're actually in a pretty decent place right now, unless you're playing Lightning and Fire. Sorry.
Yeah, I think right now that GLC is probably in one of its peak formats right now, where nothing's too overpowered, and we're kind of just, there are things that are powerful, but there are answers to those powerful things at this moment. And I remember when grass, there was no answer. I remember, I guess water had no answer there for a little bit. Snorlax had no answer for a little bit. So I think we're in a very good spot where the format's really healthy, and I don't think we have too much to complain about. And if you are, you might be looking for things to complain about.
So I will say, I think there might be one thing to complain about, and I kind of touched on it earlier. Fan Rotom is busted. Fan Rotom is absolutely bonkers. That might be
I say that.
an
I haven't
episode
played
for
against it yet.
dude. I've played with that card. My colorless spread deck went from being like kind of cute to like I had on like almost every single game that I played with it that night. I had a full bench on turn one. Like I just had nest ball, quick ball, level ball, and that just read item, play Bridget and Gloria plus play something else. Oh, also plus get your basically your draw engine online. Like it was just so bonkers what Fan Rotom could do. Plus it has donk potential, right? Like attaching
Yeah.
energy, get a stadium. So like the card itself is just so good. Again, I'm not gonna bring out the ban birds early or anything like that, but that card is really, really powerful. And I think if a good player playing colorless would just win every single tournament right now.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
So
I'm gonna have to play against it more so.
just check it out. It's broken, absolutely broken. Well, speaking of colorless, which is one of the decks that I think has a pretty decent weakness spread because fighting is its weakness, but also birds are a part of colorless, so they have resistance to fighting. It's interesting how that works out. But, weakness plays kind of a big role in Gym Leader Challenge. There's a lot of matchups that feel pretty impossible because of weakness. And so if you're one of those types, Josh, I'm fire playing against water, I'm grass playing against fighter, which doesn't happen too much. How am I teching for weakness? Can I prevent it? Is there anything to do?
There are definitely plenty of ways to prevent weakness in GLC. You have Dunsparce, which makes it to where your colorless Pokemon have no weakness. You have Metal Frying Pan, which makes it to where your metal Pokemon don't have any weakness, as well as taking 30 less damage. But on top of that metal Pokemon, you metal Pokemon also have metal coating energy that keeps it from having weakness against fire. Weakness Guard just protects your Pokemon as long as they have. I mean, you can play this on any card, but if they have a special energy cost, then it makes it that much better when playing Weakness Guard energy because it just takes away that Pokemon specific weakness. It's only for one, but it does help prevent you from, getting KO'd or double hit. But other than that, these are some of your bigger ways to tech against weakness, and Weakness Guard is one of the reasons why. Like I played this in my water deck for so long because lightning was a big deal, especially with Raku in the format at the time. You'd have Wailord taking 240 damage and just getting knocked out if you didn't have this guy on there. So I made sure, and that was one of the reasons why I put Titan in the deck as well at that time, was to just, really play my outs against lightning decks. And it just so happened to kind of form into what it is today. But yeah, these are some different ways to tech for weakness. And you can also just pay attention to different types that you're playing. Some types, like water, for instance, have weakness against metal and a weakness against lightning. So at the time, lightning was seeing a lot of play, and so I put Satan in the deck. But now metal is starting to see a lot of play. So maybe the first Pokemon I put out or try to build up isn't going to be Satitan on the next time. So you can kind of uh, make sure that whenever you're choosing your Pokemon, you pay attention to the type or the weakness that it has. Because you can have different weaknesses for the same type of Pokemon that you play.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, if you think about the water list do have some of the most diverse because Octillery is weak to grass. That came back to
Yeah,
bite me at some point. I think like a Rosa Raid KO'd my Octillery, and I was like, wait, what? Like,
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
so just things to look up. Make sure you're aware of that. And then there are some weaknesses don't make sense, like Crobat being weak to fighting when it's a bird, but I guess birds are weak to rock, so I guess it kind of makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
But
It
yeah, it's just
got to
weird.
think about the TCG. If you play the VCG, you kind of have an idea when I play the video games a lot, not like competitively or anything, but whenever I got into the TCG, I just thought the weakness coincided. The TCG and the VCG were the same thing. They're not. It completely kind of threw me off a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah. You got to just pay attention to that, or else it'll bite you in the butt.
Yeah, for sure. Now, a really cool thing about this Dunsparce, and I really like it in, obviously Ursaluna control decks are one of the things that I do like to do a whole bunch. But you can play the Dunsparce to evolve on top of this Dunsparce, which then puts itself back in the deck and draws you cards. So playing the Dunsparce isn't that big of a deal, and that shuffling itself back into your deck is pretty useful in a couple different situations. You need
Mhm.
deck space. You can put it back in, draw some cards. Obviously, if you're playing against spread decks, the Dunsparce shuffling itself back in takes damage off the board, so that's kind of nifty as well. So there's things to think about. Weakness Guard energy is really cool. I was playing it in my Meganium Torterra deck for a while, just because Torterra just has that colorless energy cost. So, if you're worried about fire doing some big damage to your Torterra, this is a card to maybe consider if you're not playing like a Rillasaur build. So, tech for weakness if you need to, but like Josh said, just mitigate it by playing a variety of weakness spreads in your list, and that will help. And sometimes you can do
Mhm.
that, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you play Hitmonbros and everything dies to Psychic.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we missed like 50 tech cards that you are all playing. So if you are listening to this and you have your super spicy tech card, or there's one card that you never leave home without, comment it below and let Josh and I know what you're teching for and what cards you're putting into your deck, because we all love that hot spice that's going to win us tournaments. So let us know. I'm excited about hearing what everyone has to say about their tech cards.
Yeah, let us know. There are so many different tech cards, and there are so many people that play GLC that I'm still surprised to this day that people are just finding new things and new things and new things. And a lot of the time, it might not be the best thing, but it's definitely their rogue decks are rogue decks for a reason, and they can take home first place if nobody sees it coming. So yeah, show us those tech cards. I'm sure there's plenty that we didn't get, and we want to know what those are.
Oh yeah, super excited. Now, Josh, you're prepping for a tournament tomorrow. I imagine you're probably bringing one of two decks. I think of you as the metal guy, and I think of you as the Titan tag team guy. What are you teching into a deck tomorrow? Whether that's a small tournament, whether that's a large tournament, what are your go-to techs in those lists?
So right now, I think a couple of my tech cards would be Hexmaniac. Hexmaniac being and knowing that they turn Hexmaniac turns my own abilities off, which I rely on heavily. But I also know that if played responsibly, that I can mitigate what I need to use ability wise and really, turn off and make sure my opponent does not get an effective turn the next turn. So I could be already set up, uh, play Hex Maniac, take a knockout, and then they don't have ways to, let's say if I'm playing against Psychic or Dragon, they can't search for that supporter card they need to respond. Or anything such as the like. So Hex Maniac is definitely one that I would be playing. And then, I mean, there's all sorts of different ones. I like to play wash energy in my water decks at all times, mainly because I want to stay away from damage counters or even stay away from poison. I've been um, just dogged on by poison before in the past. And there's sometimes I just want to make sure that I'm never going to get dogged on again, regardless if I expect to see it. Sometimes when you least expect it or put your guard down, that's when it comes up. So those are some different ways that I would do it. If I'm playing metal and I expect to play against a heavy fire meta, especially let's say if I'm going to the first GLC tournament that has Surging Sparks legal, I know there's going to be a lot and a ton of new fire cards coming in, such as Gouging Fire, Armor Rouge. What was another one? There's so many that are coming out right now. I might play Metal Frying Pan, Metal Coating Energy. I'm going to make sure that I'm not going to get knocked out by my by a fire Pokemon that easily. I want to put up a fight against that typing. But yeah, those are some things that I would do if I were going to a tournament tomorrow and some, Surging Sparks was legal. Those are some things that I would think about doing.
Yeah. I respect that a lot. I forgot about all the fire cards that are coming out. I need to do a set review coming up myself, but yeah, it's definitely something important to think about. That weakness
Yeah.
coming out.
Well, Jeff, what are you teching?
For me, it's always the same. I'm never going to lose to a Guzma boss play. Like, you're not going to boss stall me. You guys know me. I got Bird Keeper. I got Escape Rope. I got Tate and Liza in some lists. Like, I'm all about the Switch. And I think that's, obviously we didn't talk about Switch outs as being tech cards just because they have different good effects. But I can't tell you how many games out of a set of 3, if you're playing in a 3-round tournament or a 4-round tournament, my opponent has tried to probably boss stall me or Guzma stall me at some point if they're falling behind, in probably 2 of those games. So making sure I have like consistent switch outs is always important. And then at the same time, I'm probably playing a spread deck or some sort of deck that's going to fall behind. My biggest tech card is always counter catcher for those moments. We didn't talk about that either. I'm going to try to boss stall my opponents with an item card because you know what people don't play, Josh? Enough switch outs. I
Enough
can't,
switch outs.
so those are cards that I'm kind of always teching in. Yeah, I always like to check people for responsible deck building, and that's something we talked about with Jeffrey when it came to CRC. You got your consistency, your redundancy, and your comeback potential in your deck. What does your list look like when your opponent is disrupting it? And obviously, counter catcher is a big part of that and disrupting what you're trying to do. And if you've got heavy retreat costs and not enough switch outs, it's gonna be good. Or if you're having to burn your VS Seeker on a Guzma, you're not using it on a Raihan later on. So even if that card didn't have that much effect, it still changed some percentage points in your favor if you can respond appropriately. So those are just kind of cards that I think about. Obviously, we all have our kind of cards to think about.
Yes.
When we play, like we have our go-to techs.
Yeah,
I love
our personal trauma tech cards.
We've all
It's never
lost
going
to
to happen
something
again.
before. Yeah. We're such creatures of habit, which I think is, we talked about this earlier, like when people deal with bannings, it's just about what people are playing against them, right? Apparently people in Brazil get waylorded all the time. People at Cardboard Warriors used to get Snorlaxed all the times. And those are the cards that we've worried about. Right now, nothing to really worry about. It's fun to just tech for kind of a general meta.
Yep. And what's fun is that you can learn a lot about teching in a general meta. More so, it makes you more perceptive of what is being played and just paying attention to all the different meta shifts. Because if something is OP, you're just going to tech against that, and that's easy. But whenever it's a wide range and it's a big meta, that's whenever you kind of get the gears turning, and then you can actually make these choices on your own. Does that make sense?
Yep, 100%. Josh, well, any closing thoughts before we sign off and say goodnight to our wonderful, beautiful audience?
Well, all I got to say to you guys is hopefully this new direction we are going with Unfazed Facts, that it turns into something good. Hopefully we give you guys good information, such as tonight. I think tonight, we hit these tech cards pretty well. And I'm excited for the future of Unfazed Facts. And I'm a big fan of Snorlax, and I think it's just so incredibly perfect.
Yeah, I think it's good too. Also, obviously, when we made the name Let Loose, Marshadow got banned. So maybe now Unfazed Facts, just saying, maybe something happens to Snorlax. We just keep this trend going. Every time I don't like a card, we just rename the podcast and we just get rid of that card. Mahone doesn't like the podcast that much, maybe making decisions. Who knows?
Yeah, we could just
Mahone.
We can nickname the next podcast once Snorlax get banned something like a Big Pod or something like the Big Potty.
All right.
No, that's terrible.
Jumbo-sized information. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
But yeah, I'm excited for this. I'm excited for the future of this of Unfazed Facts.
Me too, Josh. It's gonna be great having someone on all the time, helping me prep and plan, and has a wonderful personality. Obviously, I'm doing what the young people might call glazing you up. I don't know if I'm using that word appropriately. There's a lot of Gen Z slang that I'm trying to learn.
Is the word you're looking for Riz?
Well, no. Riz is a thing. I spend a lot of my time with high scores unintentionally.
You would
I'm
know
a teacher.
more than I do.
Glazing is a thing. I think I mentioned it before, but glazing is just when you're talking glowingly about someone, you glaze them up. Yeah. So anyway, I'm excited, Josh, to have you on. Is what I'm getting at here. Whether or not I'm using my vernacular of the Gen Z generation correctly, if not, we'll figure that out. But again, great to have you on, Josh, and for everyone out here listening, thank you so much for staying with us on the Unfazed Facts podcast. Again, the podcast dedicated to all things Gym Leader Challenge and the Pokemon TCG. You guys have a good night.